Hello everyone. In today's video, I bring you a story that will challenge everything you believe. Get ready to meet Jasper Thornwell, a man who, after a near-death experience in 1979, returned with a revelation that will profoundly shake your beliefs. What he discovered on the other side will surprise everyone. God is not what we think, and Jesus is not who they say. Jasper's spiritual journey reveals truths that shake the very foundations of what we know. Before we begin, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any content like this, and activate the notification bell to receive all updates. Now, prepare yourself for a story that will transform your view of life and death. My name is Jasper Thornwell, and I'm here to share with you an experience that completely changed the course of my life. It happened in 1979 when I was only 19 years old. I know that for many of you, what I'm about to tell may seem crazy or simply the result of poor decisions made by a reckless young man. Maybe it's easier to think that way. After all, who would believe that a lost kid, living in the suburbs of Warren, Michigan, could have an experience beyond human understanding? I was born and raised in Warren, an industrial city near Detroit. The constant roar of the factories was the soundtrack of my youth. Life there was tough, especially for a teenager with few prospects. I was part of a group that, to be honest, was a gang. They were my friends, my substitute family, but I knew I wanted more from life. At that time, I was a rebellious young man, full of dreams and frustrations. My relationship with my family was complicated, and I sought acceptance and meaning in all the wrong places. Drugs and alcohol were a constant in our routine, a way to escape the harsh reality surrounding us. But there was something inside me, a restlessness, a desire for change. I had decided to leave it all behind and move west. I wanted to start fresh, far from the negative influences and painful memories that Warren represented for me. Little did I know that before I could realize this plan, fate had something entirely different in store for me. An experience that would not only change my plans but would transform my entire perception of reality, life and death. What I'm about to tell you is the story of that fateful night, the night that almost took my life but, ironically, showed me the true meaning of being alive. It's a journey that took me beyond the limits of the physical world, into dimensions I never imagined existed. I know many might doubt, question the truth of what I experienced. I doubted it myself for a long time. But the intensity of the experience, while the revelations I received, and the deep changes that occurred within me are too real to be ignored or explained as mere hallucination. This is my story, told with the utmost honesty and clarity possible. A story about life, death, and the vast universe that exists beyond what our eyes can see. It was a hot summer night in 1979. The air was heavy, not only with Michigan's typical humidity but with the tension of an imminent farewell. I had decided that this would be my last night with my gang before heading west. We wanted it to be memorable, a final celebration before I left everything behind. The party was at one of the group members' houses. It was a small, stuffy place, but that night it felt like it held my entire world. The loud music echoed through the thin walls, a mix of rock and disco that defined the era. The smell of cigarettes and alcohol filled the air, creating an almost tangible haze. From the beginning of the night, I was determined to fully immerse myself in the experience. I drank more than usual, smoked one cigarette after another, and accepted any substance offered to me. It was as if I wanted to erase all traces of my life in Warren with an overdose of excess. Then one of the guys came in with something new. He called it crack cocaine. In my ignorance and already altered state, I didn't think twice before trying it. I had no idea what I was really consuming. I imagined it was just another recreational drug, something to intensify the party. The effect was almost immediate and overwhelming. My heart began to beat so hard I could hear it in my ears. The world around me started spinning and distorting. The lights became brighter, the sounds more intense. It was as if each of my senses was being amplified to the limit. I tried to keep my composure, pretend everything was fine, but I quickly realized I had made a terrible mistake. Panic started to take over. My breathing became labored and I began to sweat profusely. I felt like my body was burning from the inside. Desperate for fresh air, I stumbled out of the house. The contrast between the suffocating heat inside and the night breeze hit me like a slap. But even the night air wasn't enough. My lungs burned, and every breath was a struggle. I managed to reach the front lawn before my legs gave out. I fell to my knees, then lay on my back, staring at the starry sky. The stars seemed to dance and multiply before my eyes. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. It was at that moment I realized something was terribly wrong. This wasn't just a bad reaction to drugs. I could feel my life slipping away. My heart was beating erratically, sometimes racing, sometimes almost stopping. Each beat felt like a monumental effort. I tried to scream for help, but no sound came out. I looked toward the house, hoping someone would notice my absence, come looking for me. But the party continued, oblivious to the drama unfolding on the front lawn. As I struggled to stay conscious, a grim thought crossed my mind. Is this how I'm going to die? Alone, on a dirty lawn, a victim of my own stupidity. The irony wasn't lost on me. On the night I was supposed to be celebrating a new beginning, I was facing the end. My vision began to darken around the edges. I felt an intense cold spreading through my body, starting at the extremities and inexorably advancing toward my heart. I fought against the darkness that threatened to engulf me, but it was a battle I was rapidly losing. In a final act of desperation, I did something I hadn't done in years. I prayed. It wasn't an elaborate or eloquent prayer. It was a silent cry from the depths of my soul. Please help me. I don't want to die like this. And then, just when I thought all was lost, something extraordinary happened. The darkness surrounding me suddenly turned into light, and I felt myself being pulled out of my body. It was the beginning of a journey that would change my life forever. At the moment I felt my consciousness separate from my body. I was overwhelmed by an indescribable sensation of lightness and freedom. It was as if all the burdens and worries I had carried were instantly lifted. The pain and panic that had dominated my physical being moments before were completely gone. I opened my eyes, or at least that's what it felt like, and saw myself floating above my own body. The scene below me was surreal. There I was, lying motionless on the lawn, pale and seemingly lifeless. Around me, the party continued inside the house, completely unaware of the drama unfolding outside. My first reaction was shock and confusion. How could I be seeing my own body? It was like watching a movie where I was both the actor and the audience. I tried to return to reconnect with my physical body, but it was as if an invisible barrier prevented me. As I observed the scene, I noticed my perception had changed drastically. I could see with a clarity I had never experienced before. Every blade of grass, every drop of dew seemed to vibrate with its own energy. The colors were more vivid, deeper than anything I had ever seen. But it wasn't just my vision that had changed. All of my senses seemed to have expanded in a way I couldn't fully comprehend. I could hear the party's music with stunning clarity, as if each note was a separate entity. At the same time, I was aware of sounds that would normally be imperceptible. The hum of nocturnal insects, the whisper of the wind through the leaves. It was at that moment that I noticed something even stranger. Beings of light began to appear around me, hidden among the trees and bushes. They didn't have a defined shape. They were more like glowing points that flickered and moved. When I tried to look directly at them, they disappeared, only to reappear at the edge of my vision. At first, I was terrified. What were those lights? Were they there to take me? But as I observed them, a sense of calm began to envelop me. There was no malice or threat in their presence, just a gentle curiosity. I tried to communicate with them but found that I couldn't speak in the usual way. Instead, my thoughts seemed to project like waves of energy. To my surprise, I felt the beings of light responding, not with words but with impressions and feelings that I could intuitively understand. As this happened, I began to drift further and further away from my body and the scene of the party. It was as if I was being gently pulled by an invisible current. I looked back and saw my body growing smaller, until the house and the entire neighborhood looked tiny. The sensation of movement intensified, and suddenly, I found myself traveling through what I can only describe as a tunnel of light. The walls of the tunnel pulsed with colors and patterns that defied description. It was as if I was journeying through the very fabric of the universe. During this journey, flashes of my life began to pass before me. I saw scenes from my childhood, moments of joy and sorrow, triumphs and failures. Each memory was accompanied by a deep understanding of its meaning and the lessons it held. I realized that I wasn't just reliving my life but experiencing it from a new perspective. I could feel the emotions of the people around me, understand their motivations, and feel compassion even for those who had hurt me. As the journey continued, I felt an increasing presence around me. It was something vast, loving, and infinitely wise. It didn't have a physical form, but I knew it was there, guiding and protecting me. That's when I understood. I had crossed a threshold. I was beyond the physical world, in a realm of pure energy and consciousness. The initial fear I had felt upon leaving my body had transformed into a sense of awe and reverence. As the tunnel of light began to fade, I found myself emerging into a place that defied all earthly logic and comprehension. It was the beginning of a journey that would fundamentally change my understanding of life, death, and the universe. When the tunnel of light dissipated, I found myself in an environment that defies any earthly description. It was a vast and illuminated space, but the light didn't come from any specific source. It simply existed, emanating from everything around me. The colors were more vibrant than anything I had ever seen, some of them completely new to me. It was at this moment that she appeared. I can't describe her as a human form or even as anything I've ever seen before. She was a presence, an entity of pure light and energy. Her form, if I can call it that, was constantly shifting, as if she were made of liquid light. The feeling I had in her presence was indescribable. It was as if all the love, all the compassion, and all the wisdom of the universe were condensed into a single being. There was no judgment, no fear, only total and unconditional acceptance. What was most surprising was that this entity seemed to know everything about me, not just the facts of my life, but every thought, every emotion, every dream, and every fear I'd ever had. It was as if she could see through all the layers I had built over the years, straight to the essence of my being. Without using words, but through a form of communication that went beyond language, the entity began to show me things. I saw my entire life unfold before me, not just the events as they happened, but the ripple effects of every choice I made, every word I spoke. I saw how my actions affected not only my life, but the lives of everyone around me, creating waves of impact far beyond what I could imagine. I saw the moments when I hurt others, even unintentionally, and I felt the pain I had caused as if it were my own. But I also saw the moments of kindness, the small acts of generosity that seemed insignificant to me, but had a profound impact on others. The entity didn't judge me for my failures or praise me for my virtues. She simply showed me, helping me understand on a deep level the consequences of every action, every choice. As this was happening, I felt a shift inside me. It was as if the barriers I had built over the years, cynicism, anger, fear, were dissolving. For the first time, I saw myself as I truly was, with all my flaws and all my potential. Then, without warning, the entity began to guide me on a journey that transcended time and space. In the blink of an eye, we found ourselves hovering over the pyramids of Egypt, but not the pyramids as we know them today. These were the pyramids in their prime, shining and majestic, their tops covered in gold reflecting the desert sun. The energy around the pyramids was palpable. I could see, or rather feel, invisible lines of force connecting the pyramids to each other and to the earth itself. It was as if the pyramids were massive antennas, channeling and directing cosmic energies. The entity made me understand, without words, that the pyramids were much more than tombs or monuments. They were energy machines, built with knowledge far beyond the technology we know today. They were part of a global network of power points, many of which are still hidden or forgotten by humanity. Our journey continued, and suddenly we were looking at the planet Earth from a cosmic perspective. The view was breathtaking. The Earth wasn't just a blue globe floating in space, it was alive, pulsating with a colorful aura that constantly changed. The entity showed me that the planet is known as Gaia, a living, conscious being of which we are all a part. I could see how every human action affected this aura, how our collective emotions created patterns of energy that enveloped the entire planet. I saw special energy locations scattered across the globe, some on land, others hidden deep in the oceans. These power points formed an intricate network like a planetary nervous system. The entity made me understand that humanity had largely lost its connection to this network, and that this disconnection was causing imbalances both in the planet and in ourselves. As I observed all this, I felt a deep sadness for how we've treated our planet, but also a renewed hope. The entity showed me that each of us has the power to reconnect with this planetary network, to contribute to the healing and balance of Gaia. Our cosmic journey continued, and I found myself being taken beyond our solar system, into the depths of the universe. I saw galaxies being born and dying. I saw the cosmic dance of stars and planets, and everywhere I saw life. Not necessarily life as we know it, but consciousness, in infinitely varied forms and expressions. I then understood that the universe isn't a cold, meaningless void, but a living, conscious being of which we are all a part. Every atom, every particle of light, every thought, everything is connected in a cosmic web of consciousness. The entity made me understand that our journey on Earth is just a small part of a much larger journey. That our lives, however brief they may seem, are precious and meaningful in the grand scheme of things. When we turned our attention back to Earth, the entity showed me the future, not a fixed future, but possibilities. I saw the challenges humanity would face, but I also saw the potential for great transformation and evolution. It was then that I understood the purpose of this journey. It wasn't just to show me these cosmic truths, but to help me understand my role in them. Each of us, I was shown, has a unique part to play in the evolution of consciousness. As I absorbed all of this, I felt a shift within me. The fear of death that I had felt at the beginning of this experience had completely disappeared. I understood that death, as we conceive it, is merely a transition, a change of state. The entity then asked me a silent question. Was I ready to return? To use what I had learned to make a difference in the world? At that moment, I saw flashes of my potential future. A wife, children, challenges, and joys. I saw the impact I could have on the lives of others if I chose to return. The decision was mine, and I knew that whatever choice I made, it would be accepted with love. But I also knew, deep within, that I still had work to do on Earth. With an indescribable feeling of gratitude, I chose to return. The entity enveloped me in an embrace of pure light, and I felt all the love of the universe flowing through me. Then, gently, I was guided back to the physical world, carrying with me the lessons and love I had experienced. I knew that my life would never be the same. The transition back to the physical world was as intense as the departure. It felt like I was diving into an ocean of sensations. The contrast between the lightness and expansion I had experienced and the density of the physical body was shocking. I opened my eyes and found myself still lying on the lawn, exactly where I had fallen, but something was different. The first thing I noticed was the intensity of the colors and sounds around me. It was as if my senses had been amplified. Every blade of grass, every drop of dew seemed to shine with its own light. Slowly, I began to move. My body felt heavy and awkward, as if I had forgotten how to use it. Every movement required conscious effort. I sat up and looked around. The party in the house continued, seemingly unaware of the drama I had lived through. It was then that the reality of the situation hit me. I had been on the brink of death, or perhaps beyond it. The memories of my journey began to flood my mind. The separation from my body, the tunnel of light, the encounter with the being of light, the visions of the universe and the future of humanity. Everything felt so real, so vivid. But now, back in the physical world, a part of me began to doubt. Had it all been just a dream? A hallucination caused by the drugs? The rational mind that had dominated my life until then struggled to find logical explanations for what I had experienced. However, something inside me knew that what I had lived through was real. More real, perhaps, than anything I had ever experienced. The feeling of peace, abundant of connection with something greater than myself, still resonated in every fiber of my being. I stood up with difficulty and staggered back into the house. When my friends saw me, they were shocked by my appearance. Later, they told me that I looked like I had aged years in just a few hours. My eyes, they said, had a different glow, as if they had seen things that couldn't be described. I tried to explain what had happened, but the words felt inadequate. How could I describe colors that don't exist in the visible spectrum? How could I explain sensations that transcend the five senses? The more I spoke, the more I saw the disbelief on my friends' faces. Some laughed, thinking I was still under the influence of drugs. Others were worried, fearing I had suffered some kind of brain damage. No one seemed able to grasp the depth of what I had experienced. In the days and weeks that followed, I struggled to readjust to everyday life. The world that once seemed so solid and real now felt like a dream, an illusion. The concerns and dramas that had once consumed my attention now seemed trivial in light of what I had learned. I tried to share my experience with my family, but I was met with skepticism and concern. My parents feared I was having a mental breakdown. Close friends advised me not to talk about it, fearing I would be labeled as crazy. But I couldn't simply ignore what had happened. The experience had changed something fundamental within me. My values, my perspective on life and death, my understanding of the universe. Everything had been transformed. I began searching for information about similar experiences. I read books on near-death experiences, studied spiritual philosophies, and scientific theories on consciousness. To my surprise and relief, I discovered I wasn't alone. Many people had reported similar experiences, although each one was unique in its details. At the same time, I began to notice changes within myself. The anger and resentment that had once consumed me started to dissipate. I felt a growing compassion for all the people around me, even those I once considered enemies. Nature, which I had barely noticed before, now filled me with awe and reverence. More surprisingly, I began having what I can only describe as flashes of intuition. Sometimes I knew things I had no way of knowing. I foresaw events before they happened, felt others' emotions as if they were my own. One of these events shook me deeply. I had a clear vision of a close friend dying in a car accident. Days later, I received the news that he had passed away exactly as I had seen. This experience, though painful, solidified my certainty that what I had experienced was real. Gradually, I learned to integrate my experience into my everyday life. I left behind my old lifestyle, gave up drugs and alcohol. I began meditating, seeking ways to reconnect with that sense of oneness I had experienced. The path wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, moments when the loneliness of not being understood weighed heavily on me. But with each step, I felt I was following a greater calling, fulfilling the purpose for which I had chosen to return. Years passed, and little by little, I found others who had shared similar experiences. We formed a community of mutual support, a space where we could openly talk about our journeys without fear of judgment. Today, looking back, I see that that night in 1979 wasn't the end, but the beginning of a journey of self-discovery, spiritual growth, and service to others. The revelation I received continues to guide me, constantly reminding me of the interconnectedness of all things, the preciousness of each moment, and the transformative power of love. I know many still doubt, still question the truth of what I experienced, and that's okay. I'm not trying to convince anyone. I simply share my story in the hope that it may bring comfort, inspiration, or a glimpse of a greater reality to those who are ready to receive it. My near-death experience taught me that life is far vaster, far more mysterious, and far more beautiful than we could ever imagine. and that each of us has a unique role to play in the grand cosmic dance of existence. In the months and years following my near-death experience, I underwent a profound inner transformation. It was a gradual process, sometimes painful, but always enriching. Each day brought new revelations, new challenges, and new opportunities for growth. One of the most significant changes was in my perception of reality. The world that once seemed solid and unchanging now revealed itself as fluid, vibrant, and interconnected. I began to see the energy that permeates all things, the consciousness that inhabits every living being. This new perception brought with it a deep sense of reverence for life in all its forms. My relationship with nature changed dramatically. I felt a deep connection with trees, plants, and animals. Each walk in the forest became an almost mystical experience, where I could feel the pulse of life around me. The sound of the wind in the leaves, the songs of birds, even the hum of insects, all seemed to carry messages, if I was willing to listen. My values and priorities also underwent a complete upheaval. The things that had once seemed so important, social status, material possessions, conventional success, lost much of their appeal. In their place arose a burning desire to live a life aligned with deeper purpose and meaning. Compassion became a driving force in my life. I realized that every person I encountered was on their own journey, facing their own challenges and struggling with their own fears and insecurities. This understanding led me to be more patient, more understanding, and more willing to reach out and help others. My relationship with time also changed. The frantic urgency that once characterized my days gave way to a more peaceful acceptance of the natural flow of things. I learned to value the present moment, to find joy in the small things of everyday life. One of the most challenging transformations was my relationship with fear, particularly the fear of death. My experience had shown me that death is not the end, but a transition. This understanding didn't completely eliminate the fear, but it transformed it. Instead of fearing death, I began to see each day as a precious opportunity to grow, learn, and make a difference in the lives of others. My spirituality also evolved in ways I could never have predicted. Before my experience, I was skeptical of anything that couldn't be scientifically proven. Afterward, I found myself open to a vast world of spiritual possibilities. It was no longer about believing in an external God or a specific set of religious dogmas, but about recognizing the divinity present in all things, including myself. I began exploring various spiritual practices: meditation, yoga, contemplative prayer. Each of these practices helped me reconnect with that sense of unity and peace I had experienced during my journey beyond life. Gradually, I learned to access altered states of consciousness, not through drugs, but through breathing techniques, concentration, and inner stillness. My understanding of the concept of God also underwent a radical transformation. What I once saw as an external entity, I now understood as the sum of all energy and consciousness in the universe. God was not out there in some distant heavenly realm, but here and now, in every atom, every thought, every moment. This new understanding brought with it a sense of responsibility. If everything is divine, if everything is interconnected, then each of our actions impacts the whole. I began to see my life not as a series of random events, but as an opportunity to contribute to the evolution of consciousness. Another significant change was my relationship with suffering. Before, I viewed suffering as something to be avoided at all costs. Now, I began to see it as a teacher, an opportunity for growth and transformation. This doesn't mean that I sought out suffering, but I learned to face it with more courage and openness when it inevitably arose. My experience also left me with a deep sense of purpose. I knew that I had chosen to return for a reason, and I was determined to discover and fulfill that purpose. This led me to explore different paths of service to others, from volunteering in hospitals and nursing homes to sharing my story with those going through their own existential crises. One of the most profound lessons I learned was about the nature of love. The love I experienced during my journey beyond life was something far beyond what we typically call love in our daily experience. It was unconditional, infinite, all-encompassing. I began to understand that this love is the true essence of the universe, the force that unites all things. Inspired by this understanding, I strove to bring more of this unconditional love into my daily life. It wasn't easy. Old patterns of judgment, fear, and selfishness continued to arise. But each time I managed to respond with love to a difficult situation, I felt I was fulfilling the purpose for which I had returned. My relationship with knowledge and learning also changed. I developed an insatiable curiosity about the world around me. I began studying not only near-death experiences and spirituality, but also quantum physics, neuroscience, philosophy, and art. Each new piece of knowledge seemed to fit into a larger puzzle, confirming and expanding what I had experienced. At the same time, I realized that true knowledge goes beyond the intellect. There was a deeper wisdom, an intuitive understanding that could only be accessed through direct experience. I learned to trust my intuition more, to listen to the silent voice of inner wisdom. One of the most challenging transformations was learning to live between two worlds: the physical world with its demands and limitations, and the spiritual world I had glimpsed. There were times when I felt like a stranger in my own life, unable to relate to the concerns and priorities that seemed to consume the people around me. But over time, I learned to find a balance. I realized that my task was not to escape the physical world, but to bring something of the spiritual world into the physical. Each act of kindness, each moment of conscious presence, each expression of unconditional love was a way to do just that. As the years passed, I noticed that my inner transformation began to affect the world around me. People started seeking me out for guidance and support. Many said they felt calmer and more centered just by being in my presence. I realized that, even without saying a word, I was sharing something of the light I had experienced. Looking back, I see that my near-death experience was just the beginning of a transformation journey that continues to this day. Each day brings new discoveries, new challenges, new opportunities for growth. And although the path is sometimes difficult, I am deeply grateful for the opportunity to walk it. My transformation taught me that we all have the potential for change and growth within us. It doesn't take a near-death experience to awaken to a greater reality. Every moment is an opportunity to choose love, to expand our consciousness, to become more than we are. And so, I continue my journey, grateful for every breath, every experience, every opportunity to grow and serve. I know I still have much to learn, much to experience. But now I face the future not with fear, but with joyful anticipation, knowing that each step brings me closer to home. As the years passed after my near-death experience, I felt an increasingly strong call to share what I had learned. It wasn't a desire to convince others or to prove that my experience was real. It was more like an inner necessity, an impulse to offer hope and a different perspective to those struggling with the same existential questions I had faced. In the beginning, sharing my story wasn't easy. I faced a lot of skepticism and even ridicule. Some people accused me of seeking attention or suffering brain damage from the overdose. Others, particularly those with strong religious beliefs, saw my experience as a demonic influence. But to my surprise, I also found people who were deeply moved by my story. They were people of all kinds, young and old, religious and atheist, scientists and artists. What they had in common was an openness to consider that there might be more to reality than what we perceive with our five senses. I started modestly, sharing my story in small support groups for people who had gone through similar experiences. It was comforting to find others who could understand what I had lived through, who didn't judge me as crazy or a liar. In those groups, I learned that every near-death experience is unique. But there are common themes: the sense of deep peace, the encounter with beings of light, the life review, the feeling of oneness with the universe. As I gained confidence, I began accepting invitations to speak at larger events, conferences on consciousness, symposia on the relationship between science and spirituality, even some more progressive churches. Each time I shared my story, I was surprised by the response. People would come up to me with tears in their eyes, saying that my experience had touched something deep within them, that it had given them hope in a difficult time. One of the challenges I faced was finding the right words to describe what I had experienced. How do you explain colors that don't exist in our visible spectrum? How do you describe sensations that go beyond our five senses? I learned to use metaphors and analogies, to evoke feelings and impressions rather than try to give literal descriptions. I also learned the importance of respecting each person's beliefs and perspective. I realized that my experience didn't invalidate traditional religious beliefs. In fact, it often complemented and deepened them. I learned to present my story not as an absolute truth, but as a perspective, a possibility for consideration. Over time, I began writing about my experience. At first, they were just personal notes, a way to process and better understand what I had lived through. But those notes eventually turned into a book. The writing process was both challenging and therapeutic. It forced me to examine every aspect of my experience, to seek clarity and honesty in every word. When the book was published, I was surprised by the reception. I received letters and emails from people all over the world, sharing their own experiences, asking questions, and expressing gratitude. I realized that I had touched something universal, something that transcended cultures and beliefs. One of the most gratifying things was seeing how my story affected people who were dealing with the loss of loved ones. Many told me that my account had eased their fear of death and given them comfort in their grief. A woman wrote to me saying that after reading my book, she was finally able to accept her son's death and find peace. As my message spread, I began receiving invitations to appear on radio and television programs. At first, I was apprehensive. I feared that my experience might be sensationalized or ridiculed, but I found that, most of the time, the interviewers were genuinely interested and respectful. One interview in particular stands out in my memory. It was on a national radio show, and the host was known for his skepticism about anything supernatural. He started the interview with a skeptical, almost mocking tone. But as I shared my story, I noticed a change in his attitude. His questions became more serious, more reflective. By the end of the interview, he admitted that, while he still wasn't convinced, my account had made him question some of his assumptions about the nature of reality. Not all reactions were positive, of course. I faced criticism from skeptics who argued that my experience could be explained as a drug-induced hallucination or lack of oxygen to the brain. Some religious fundamentalists accused me of spreading heresies. I even received a few threats from people who saw my message as dangerous or misleading. These criticisms and threats were painful, but I learned not to let them shake me. My experience had taught me that each person is on their own journey, and that it wasn't my place to judge or force my perspective on others. I learned to respond to criticism with compassion and understanding, recognizing that fear and uncertainty are often at the root of skepticism and hostility. One of the most important lessons I learned from sharing my story was the importance of staying grounded in my own truth. It was easy to be carried away by the enthusiasm of believers or shaken by the doubts of skeptics. But I learned that my responsibility was simply to share honestly what I had experienced, allowing each person to draw their own conclusions. Over the years, my message evolved. It was no longer just about my near-death experience, but about the broader lessons I had learned, about the nature of consciousness, about our interconnectedness with all things, and about the transformative power of unconditional love. I began offering workshops and retreats, teaching meditation techniques and spiritual practices that helped people connect with their own inner wisdom. I wasn't trying to create followers or start a new spiritual movement. My goal was simply to offer tools that people could use to explore their own consciousness and find their own answers. One of the most rewarding things was seeing how people applied the ideas I shared in their own lives. I received stories from people who had transformed difficult relationships through the practice of unconditional love, from business people who had redirected their companies to be more ethical and sustainable, and from artists who had found new sources of inspiration. As the years passed, I noticed a gradual shift in how near-death experiences were perceived by society at large. When I first began sharing my story, the topic was seen as something fringe, almost taboo. But slowly, I saw growing interest from the scientific community, with serious researchers beginning to study these experiences systematically. I also saw greater openness in the field of medicine. Some hospitals began offering training to their staff on how to deal with patients who reported near-death experiences. Nurses and doctors would reach out to me, wanting to know how they could better support these patients. One of the most gratifying experiences was being invited to speak at a medical school. It was an opportunity to share my story with future doctors, encouraging them to be open to their patients' experiences, which might go beyond what is currently explainable by science. Throughout this entire journey of sharing my experience, one thing remained constant: my gratitude. Gratitude for the experience itself, for having had a glimpse of a greater reality. Gratitude for being able to return and share what I had learned. And gratitude for each person who was willing to listen, to consider, to open themselves to new possibilities. Sharing my story became more than just recounting what had happened to me. It became a way of honoring the gift I had received, of fulfilling the purpose for which I chose to return. Every time I see a spark of recognition in someone's eyes, every time I feel that I've touched a heart or opened a mind, I feel that I'm fulfilling that purpose. And so, I continue to share, continue to learn, continue to grow. My journey is far from over. In fact, I feel it is only just beginning. As the years passed and I continued to share my experience, I began to notice a broader impact, not just on the individual lives of those who heard my story, but also in the fields of science and spirituality. In the beginning, the scientific community was largely skeptical of near-death experiences, NDEs. Many dismissed them as hallucinations caused by a lack of oxygen to the brain or as side effects of medication. However, as more and more people shared their experiences, and as more rigorous research was conducted, this attitude began to shift. I had the opportunity to participate in several scientific studies on NDEs. I underwent neurological exams, psychological tests, and detailed interviews. It was fascinating to see how scientists approached something so deeply personal and subjective with their objective tools and rigorous methodologies. One of the most interesting studies I participated in was conducted by a neuroscientist investigating changes in the brains of people who had experienced NDEs. Using advanced brain imaging techniques, he discovered significant differences in the brain activity patterns of people like me compared to a control group. These findings raised fascinating questions about the relationship between the brain and consciousness. Is the brain really the producer of consciousness, as many scientists believe? Or is it more like a receiver, tuning into a consciousness that exists beyond the physical body? My experience certainly suggested the latter possibility, but it was exciting to see science begin to seriously explore these questions. At the same time, I saw a significant impact in the field of spirituality. Many people who heard my story, and those of others who had NDEs, found in them a bridge between traditional spirituality and a broader, more inclusive understanding of the divine. I was invited to speak at various churches and other religious centers. Initially, I expected resistance, especially since some aspects of my experience didn't align perfectly with specific religious doctrines. But to my surprise, I encountered much openness and interest. A pastor once told me, "Your experience doesn't contradict our faith. It expands it. It reminds us that God's love is greater than any specific doctrine or belief." This attitude of openness and inclusion was something I saw more and more, not only in individuals but in entire religious communities. I also noticed a growing interest in the dialogue between science and spirituality. I participated in several conferences where scientists, philosophers, and spiritual leaders gathered to discuss the implications of NDEs and other transcendent experiences. It was inspiring to see people from different backgrounds and perspectives united by a common desire to better understand the nature of consciousness and reality. One of the most interesting developments I observed was the emergence of a new generation of researchers willing to push the boundaries of science to investigate phenomena previously considered beyond the scope of scientific inquiry. These scientists were developing new theories and methodologies to study consciousness, spirituality, and transcendent experiences like NDEs. I had the privilege of working with some of these researchers, sharing my experience and helping to develop research protocols. It was gratifying to see how my personal story could contribute to the advancement of scientific knowledge. At the same time, I saw a growing impact in the field of medicine. Doctors and nurses began recognizing the importance of addressing not only the physical body, but also the emotional and spiritual dimensions of healing. Some hospitals started incorporating practices like meditation and guided visualization into their treatment protocols. I was invited to speak at several medical schools, sharing my experience with future doctors. My goal wasn't to convince them of the reality of NDEs, but to encourage them to keep an open mind and treat their patients as whole beings, not just as physical bodies. One of the most rewarding experiences was seeing how my story inspired new directions in scientific research. A young neuroscientist once told me that after hearing my lecture, he decided to dedicate his career to studying consciousness. Your experience made me realize that there's much more to understand about the human mind than what we learn in textbooks, he said. In the field of psychology, I saw growing interest in the transformative potential of NDEs. Psychologists and therapists began exploring how the lessons from these experiences could be applied to help people cope with the fear of death, grief, and other existential issues. I participated in several studies investigating long-term changes in people who had experienced NDEs. The results were fascinating. In general, people like me showed a significant decrease in the fear of death, an increase in compassion and empathy, and a greater sense of purpose in life. One of the most exciting developments I observed was the growing acceptance of the idea that consciousness might be more fundamental than matter. This notion, which aligns with my own experience, is gaining ground not only in philosophy and spirituality, but also in some branches of theoretical physics. I had the opportunity to speak with quantum physicists who were exploring theories suggesting that consciousness is a fundamental aspect of the universe, not just a byproduct of brain activity. While these ideas are still controversial, it's exciting to see how they are expanding our understanding of the nature of reality. Reflecting on the impact of my experience on science and spirituality, I'm struck by how far we've come. When I first started sharing my story, NDEs were often ridiculed or ignored by the scientific community. Today, they are the subject of serious scientific study and philosophical discussion. At the same time, I see that there is still much to explore. NDEs raise fundamental questions about the nature of consciousness, the relationship between mind and brain, and the possibility of existence beyond physical death. These are questions at the heart of our understanding of reality and ourselves. I am deeply grateful to have been able to contribute, even in a modest way, to this ongoing exploration. My hope is that as we continue to investigate these questions, we can develop a deeper and more holistic understanding of who we are and our place in the universe. But perhaps the most significant impact I've seen is how these explorations are beginning to break down the barriers between science and spirituality. More and more, I see scientists and spiritual leaders working together, recognizing that both fields have valuable contributions to offer in our quest to understand the nature of reality and consciousness. This convergence between science and spirituality gives me great hope for the future. I believe that as we continue to explore and integrate different forms of knowledge, we can develop a more complete and compassionate understanding of ourselves and the universe we live in. As I grow older, I think more and more about the legacy I will leave behind. I do not seek fame or personal recognition, but I hope that my story will continue to inspire and comfort people long after I am gone. I have established a foundation to support research on consciousness and transcendent experiences. My goal is to foster a more holistic and integrative approach to science and medicine. I have written several books sharing not only my experience, but also the lessons and insights I have gained over the years. I hope these words can be a source of comfort and inspiration for future generations. But above all, I hope that my legacy will be the love and compassion I have tried to cultivate and share throughout my life. If my story has helped even one person find peace, hope, or a deeper sense of purpose, then I feel I have fulfilled the mission for which I chose to return. As I prepare for the next great transition, I do so not with fear, but with a sense of serene expectation. I know that death is not the end, but just the beginning of a new phase in the eternal journey of consciousness. And so, I conclude my story, grateful for every moment, every challenge, every opportunity to grow and serve. The journey continues, and I can't wait to see what comes next. If you enjoyed this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment with your thoughts, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to as many people as possible. Until next time.